Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Here at MTG Time 60, we go over deck lists, deck building strategies, and whatnot for 60 card Magic. And today we're going to be talking about a humans deck. And this is part of our Epic on a Budget series. So the whole thing costs less than 20 bucks. If you click the link in the description below, it will likely give a much higher price, but just choose TCG player prices and you should get something close to that. Okay, so let's take a look. This basically just floods the board with creatures, makes them pretty big, and we have a number of interesting abilities that will make it easier to get damage through. So even though it doesn't go quite as wide as some other decks, it does go pretty tall too. So let's take a look. Here's a nice mana curve. Okay, so we have, this is just 100% humans. Okay, if you look at our types, we have just 38 creatures and 22 lands. So it's a very high density of human creatures, right? And even a few of our lands can make human tokens, right? So that is one of the synergies we're going to tap into is the human type. The other one we're going to build around here is +1/+ encounters, especially. Some other counters too, but especially +1/+ encounters. Okay, so Champion the Parish is a great way to get started. A single white mana for a 1/1, and whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+ encounter on Champion the Parish. That can get big pretty fast. Okay. Hopeful Initiate costs a single white mana for 1/2. It has training, so whenever this creature attacks, then you put a +1/+ encounter on it if it attacked with another creature with greater power. Right, so if it's a 1/2, if you attack with it and a 2-power creature, great. Put a +1/+ encounter on Hopeful Initiate. That kind of idea. Okay, so that can just get bigger and bigger and bigger as the game goes along, as long as you have something else that's bigger than it. Okay, which is pretty easy with Champion the Parish or some of the other options. Right. It also is serving as our artifact enchantment removal for the deck. Because you can pay 2 and a white and remove 2 +1/+ encounters from among creatures you control. Importantly, that does not mean it has to be Hopeful Initiates +1/+ encounters. You can easily play this for a white mana on turn 4, for example, and immediately remove 2 +1/+ encounters from other creatures. Okay, to get rid of a problematic artifact or enchantment. All right, so those those are our 1-drops that we're gonna plan on casting on turn 1. Giant Killer technically is a single white mana. We'll get to him in a second. It's not really our main plan to play him on turn 1 though. Okay? That's why I moved him over to mana value of 3. Okay, Coppercoat Vanguard. This one is pretty awesome. It costs a 1 and a white. And it's a 2/2. And it gives each other human you control +1/+0 and ward 1, which means that if an opponent targets any human you control, other humans you control, with either spells or abilities, they are countered unless they pay a single mana. Now, that isn't a huge tax. However, we aren't paying a whole lot for our creatures, so any amount that our opponent has to slow down removal is just a tempo loss that helps us, right? And definitely, if you have multiple Coppercoat Vanguards out, that actually can stack up pretty quickly. Ward 2 is surprisingly difficult to pay effectively, just because it slows you down, right? But Ward 1 is pretty good. Okay, and definitely adding power helps. Okay, this is a somewhat aggressive deck. Luminarch Aspirant, 1 and a white for 1/1. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+ encounter on target creature you control. This is an amazing card because of its flexibility. Okay, so it can be just a 2-mana 1/1 that just puts a +1/+ encounter on itself every turn, which is decent. However, you can put +1/+ encounters on other stuff. So you can play it and then immediately put it on a creature that can attack that turn, so you get immediate value. You can also put it on some other stuff that can synergize nicely, like Reluctant Role Model. Okay, so Reluctant Role Model is a 1 white for a 2/2. However, it has an interesting ability, Survival. This is from the Duskmourn set. Survival, at the beginning of your second main phase, if Reluctant Role Model is tapped, put a flying lifelink or +1/+1 counter on it. Now, that there are lots of ways of tapping creatures. In this deck, the only real way to tap it is to attack with it. Okay. However, we are trying to attack, so that's cool. However, if it dies, we don't get that benefit. Oh well, right? That's what I was saying with Luminarch Aspirant is that if we put a +1/+1 counter on a Reluctant Role Model, that can make it so it can attack in more easily, right? And even if we make our opponent trade with our Reluctant Role Model because of the threat of this survival ability, that's still pretty cool, right? So if it's tapped, you get to put a flying, lifelink, or +1/+1 counter on it. Okay, so if it's tapped at the beginning of your second main phase, that's pretty good. Because if you can get one attack in without it dying, even if it's jump blocked, right? As long as it doesn't die, then you can put a flying counter on it, for example. That's definitely what I would default to. Especially early game, right? Against most decks, because then it's easier to get more attacks in later and put more counters on it. Flying, lifelink, or +1/+1 counter, that's it's a pretty good set of options right there. Okay, and you can do that every turn you can swing in with it. Also, whenever Reluctant Role Model or another creature you control dies, if it had counters on it, put those counters on up to one target creature. That's huge, right? Because we have a lot of creatures that end up with +1/+1 counters. So we can keep those counters around if those creatures die. We have Reluctant Role Model. So sometimes you might just play Reluctant Role Model and not attack with it, but attack with other stuff that might even die in combat, like Champion the Parish. Say we have Champion the Parish with, even a couple counters on it, and we play a Reluctant Role Model, swing in with Champion the Parish. If they kill it, then we can just put those counters on a Reluctant Role Model or whatever other creature we want, and then be able to swing in with Reluctant Role Model more easily and activate this survival ability, right? Or it would trigger. Okay, so there's a number of options you can do with that, but there's a lot of power there. Okay, Thalia's Lieutenant, 1 white for a 1/1 again, and it has an ability similar to Champion of the Parish, where whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. However, for that extra generic mana, you also get whenever Thales enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each other human you control. That's very good. Champion of the Parish is not the best card to top deck late game. However, Thalia's Lieutenant, if you have even just a few other creatures, or even a couple, honestly, you get a decent amount of benefit just from casting that even late game, which is very nice. One of the best ways to start this, with this deck is Champion of the Parish on turn 1, and then Thalia's Lieutenant on turn 2, because then Champion of the Parish puts a +1/+1 counter on itself, and Thalia's Lieutenant puts a +1/+1 counter on it. Which brings us up to a 3/3 that you can attack with on turn 2, which is very, very good. Okay, so don't save Thalia's Lieutenant till you have several creatures. The really, really nice thing about it is that it's just good whenever, because if you cast it early, it gets big. If you cast it late, it makes everything else a little bit bigger, right? So powerhouse card right here. All right, next up we've got Brutal Cathar. Okay, now that's a 2 white for a 2/2. And when this creature enters the battlefield or transforms into Brutal Cathar, exile target creature an opponent controls until this creature leaves the battlefield. So this is nice for just removing any creature. Might be temporary, but temporary is better than nothing, right? And it is a slightly complicated because of the day-bound, night-bound thing. But when this enters, it becomes day. And if a player casts no spells during their own turn, it becomes night next turn. Okay. Well, when this enters, if it's not day or night already, it becomes day. Okay. And then if a player casts no spells during their own turn, it becomes night next turn. Okay, at the beginning of the turn. So when it becomes night, it flips into this. Okay, so 3/3 with first strike and ward, pay 3 life. Okay, which is pretty good. And that's night bound. So if a player casts 2 spells during their own turn, it becomes day the next turn. So then flip back into this and exile another creature. So you can hypothetically get multiple creatures removed with the Brutal Cathar. I wouldn't count on it. Okay, if it happens, that's awesome. If not, oh well. Generally, you're just gonna cast it to get rid of one thing. Maybe that makes it so you can swing in with everything else, because you just take out their one big blocker or whatever, right? Or maybe you exile a big flying threat that was about to attack and kill you, right? Like it's pretty useful. And you often will not want to attack with Brutal Cathar, because if it dies, then they get the thing back, right? That is a risk. Also, though, keep in mind if you exile creature tokens, for example, they just cease to exist, and so they don't get anything back if this dies, in which case you could swing in with this without any problem. Also, obviously, if you can swing in with it safely, then that's pretty cool. Which brings us to our next card, Frontline Medic. Again, 2 and a white for 3/3 this time. And Battalion. Whenever Frontline Medic and at least 2 other creatures attack, creatures you control gain Indestructible until end of turn. This is a very, very good way of being able to attack with Brutal Cathar. Also, being able to attack with a Reluctant Role Model. Okay, because giving Indestructible means you can just attack in, you don't die, and then you get the survival thing, right? So that's pretty huge. Okay, we want to attack in a lot, and this makes it so that we're not going to lose our little creatures. All right. You can also, it's kind of a backup ability, honestly, but you can sacrifice it to counter target spell with X in its mana cost, unless its controller pays 3. That will not come up necessarily super often, but when it does, that's pretty cool, right? Generally speaking, though, you're just going to want to give your creatures Indestructible when it attacks with at least 2 other creatures. Okay, Giant Killer, our other removal spell. I put it at mana value 3 for its adventure, because that's really the biggest reason why we're playing this. 3 mana, 2 and a white for an instant. Destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. Okay, fairly straightforward. Very nice. And then you exile it, since it's an adventure, right? You exile the card as it resolves. And then you can cast the creature later from exile. You can, of course, just cast the creature. And that's the right option sometimes, especially because we have stuff that triggers whenever a creature enters, right? So it can be good to do that. However, you're often going to want to keep it around for the chop down. Against some decks, though, especially very small, small creature decks, don't worry about the chop down. Just play it as a creature, right? And the really nice thing is that it still acts as pseudo removal as a creature, because you can pay 1 and a white and tap it to tap target creature, which is an effective way of keeping stuff from attacking or blocking. Very nice. And flexible option. Next up, we have Riders of Gavany, which is kind of top of the curve, top of the mana curve. This just helps us be able to get damage in or actually block more effectively. So it costs 2, white, and it's a 3/3 with Vigilance. And as it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Okay. And human creatures you control have protection from creatures of the chosen type. All right. Interestingly enough, this is not an enters the battlefield triggered ability. It just happens as it enters. So this comes into the battlefield already having protection from the chosen type. So if your opponent has creatures that can target other creatures, there are many that can do that, then they can't respond to this by removing Riders of Gavany with that creature type, because it enters already having that protection. And what protection means is that it prevents all damage that would be dealt to human creatures you control from sources of that type. It also makes it so they can't, so your human creatures can't be blocked by creatures of the chosen type, and it can't be targeted by sources of that type, right? So human creatures you control can't be targeted by abilities of creatures of the chosen type. So that's pretty nice. You can use that, like I said, to let you get damage through, or to make it so you can block, or both, right? Some decks, obviously, this will just be game over. If it's a tribal deck, you can just give your all your creatures unblockable, essentially, if they only have one creature type. However, you can also just choose, the creature type of the biggest blockers or whatnot, right? And that can make it so you can swing in. It also makes it so you can block without taking damage, right? That's very nice. Of course, keep in mind the fact that if you say you name, I don't know, beasts, beast, and then you block a beast with a human, and then Riders of Gavany gets removed at instant speed before damage resolves, then your thing can die, right? So just keep that in mind, but it's pretty good. If in that case, I would probably block with Riders of Gavany, so that then if they take this out, I'm not losing something else, right? If I only need one blocker to block something. Castle Ardenvale. It's a land. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control planes. We are running 17 planes, so often, really almost always, this should come into play untapped. And it taps for white. You can pay 2 and white, so 4 total mana, and tap it to create a 1/1 white human creature token. Right? So that's nice if you're flooding out, nice if you get board wiped, whatnot. You have something to do with your lands. Also, if you just run out of cards, have at least 5 lands, including Castle Ardenvale, you can make a human to keep adding to your battlefield, and also it will trigger Champion of the Parish and Thalia's Tenant, which is nice. Cave of the Frost Dragon is a pretty interesting land. It enters untapped if it's one of the first 2 lands you have. So how they word it is if you control 2 or more other lands, it enters tapped. Okay. So you always want to play this very early. Like if you have this and it's your first couple turns, play this basically, right? Because then it's untapped. Otherwise, it will enter tapped. But you can pay 4 and a white, and it becomes a 3/4 white dragon creature with flying until end of turn. It's still a land. Okay, so that's just a nice little backup land for if you get way too much land late game, you can have a flying attacker or blocker, which is a pretty good way of surviving or winning the game in many cases. And that basically just finishes it up right there. All right, so we're going to go to the playtester now and see how this goes. All right, here we go. We have 3 lands, which is a good number. We've got Champion of the Parish, Coppercoat Vanguard, Hopeful Initiate, and Frontline Medic, which are a pretty solid set of options here. So we're going to keep this. And Turn 1, I would definitely play Champion the Parish. Okay, this is just a super solid way to start the game. Okay, turn 2, I generally like to use up all my mana, so Hopeful Initiate would be a pretty good option, because then, pretty soon you'll be able to attack with it and Champion the Parish and put +1/+1 counters on it, and that honestly probably wouldn't be a terrible idea. Okay, I'm gonna go with Coppercoat Vanguard though right now, because that will then put a +1/+1 counter on this and give it +1. So now it's a 3/2, and you can attack with that. Hopefully that gets in. Okay. Oftentimes, your opponent's first play will not be able to block a 3/2 without just dying, and often won't kill Champion the Parish, so they often just won't. Okay. Next turn, though, we can play either Brutal Cathar or Frontline Medic. In general, I think I would go with Frontline Medic, but Brutal Cathar could be really good if, for example, your opponent only has one creature that's really doing anything at all. Then you could just play Brutal Cathar, get rid of it, and swing in with everything else. But we'll say, okay, cool, on turn 2 they played, something nasty, right? I don't know. So then this will get a +1/+1 counter, and say, okay, cool, now it's a 4/3. Maybe they play a 3/3 for 2 mana, so maybe we just don't attack this turn. Right, but then the next turn, we can say, well, how about Hopeful Initiate? That'll put a +1/+1 counter on this, and a Coppercoat Vanguard, which will give +1/+0 and ward 1 to everything else. So now Champion the Parish has, okay, let's see, this also gives a +1/+1 counter. Okay, so now it's a 5/5, but it gets +1/+0 and +1/+0, so it's really a 7/5 with ward 2, essentially. That's really pretty good. Also, playing Coppercoat Vanguard first gave Frontline Medic ward 1, which, can help it stay alive as well. And so now this is a pretty solid setup. We have, some stuff to block. Our Hopeful Initiate and Coppercoat Vanguard that came this turn can stay around to block if need be, but we can actually just swing in with these 3 creatures that will all get indestructible. Right? So even though these aren't, this is a 2/2, not super huge, and this is a 4/3 that's good sized, they all have indestructible. Okay, so we're just going to assume this gets jump blocked. Most people don't like getting hit by a 7/5. Okay, so we'll say, okay, cool, we got in with 4/3 and 2/2, so that's 6 more damage. That's pretty good. Oops. Okay. And then this turn, say they played something big on their 4th turn or whatever. Maybe Hopeful Initiate. Maybe this Hopeful Initiate had to take one for the team and block, right? It was blocking as a 3/2, so that's pretty cool. So hopefully it took out something with it, but we'll say, cool, it had to block. Because our opponent played something huge, well, we can say, cool, well, Brutal Cathar, get rid of that huge thing. Okay, and now Brutal Cathar has ward 2, which means they're going to have a harder time removing it to get their thing back. And then we can just swing in. Okay, this gets a +1/+1 counter when this enters. So this is now an 8/6. That's a 4/3, 3/2, and a 3/2. I guess it's the 3/2 last turn as well. So actually, they took 1 more point of damage last turn. I forgot the boost from this. Okay, so we've got 3, 3, 5, and 8. So that's a lot of damage. Basically, if any two of them hit, then we win the game. Okay, so say they block the two biggest, or sorry, not quite any two. If they block these two, we'll say they block those two. We get in with these, they're down to 4 now. But they probably also lost a couple creatures, right? So now they're in a really bad spot. We can just play out some more stuff if we want, right? Make Champion of the Parish even bigger. And then we could just swing in with the gang and win the game. Okay, that's pretty good. And yeah, they might have been able to remove something, but especially with the ward running around, that just makes the removal slower, makes it so they have to pay a lot more for the removal, which means they don't have as many creatures on the battlefield, so they can block stuff. So, it just puts our opponent in kind of an awkward spot where they have to, play out creatures to block or remove stuff, but either one, gets expensive because their blockers die and their removal costs extra, right? And they're not really getting rid of stuff when they block because it's indestructible. It's a pretty good way to win a game, right? All right, that takes care of that. Alrighty, that's honestly, pretty good showing for the deck. I feel like that's often how it plays out. You just play, a number of things that grow and a number of support cards that protect and pump and whatnot. And a little bit of removal goes a long way, especially in an aggressive deck. And it's really kind of cool because we have a fairly aggressive deck, but we still have actually 4 artifact enchantment removal and 6 creature removal cards. So we've got a decent number of removal options while still maintaining a fairly aggressive build, since they're all based on creatures. Yeah. So anyways, I hope you enjoy this deck, and definitely if you build it, please let me know how it goes. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, and you can check out other videos in the series. And definitely let me know in the comments below if there's some deck you'd like to see, or if you have a question or anything like that. Anyways, have a good one. Till next time, ciao.